Before you continue, breathe. What you're about to hear isn't a story, it's a mirror. And once you look into it, you can't unsee what hides behind your reflection. Ask yourself, are you ready to meet the version of you that has been waiting in the dark all along? They say the mirror never lies, but that is only true until it begins to speak. Most people live their entire lives glancing at their reflection without ever truly seeing it. The surface smiles back, obedient and silent, while something far older stirs beneath the glass, watching, waiting, calculating the day you will finally look deep enough. When that day arrives, it does not greet you with light. It greets you with shadow. The first time I understood this, I was standing in front of a patient who claimed her reflection moved when she did not. She spoke with a calmness that made the room colder. "It smiles when I feel sad," she said, "and frowns when I try to pretend I'm fine." Most doctors at the time would have dismissed her as delusional, but I knew the language of the unconscious. I knew that the mirror she feared was not made of glass. It was made of psyche. The mirror is not an object. It is a process. Every thought you suppress, every impulse you deny, every emotion you bury becomes a silent fingerprint on that inner surface. Over time, these imprints gather form, voice, and identity. This is what I call the shadow, the hidden twin of consciousness, composed of everything we refuse to see about ourselves. The moment you glimpse it, reality fractures, because you realize the monster you've been running from wears your own face. When modern neuroscience began to study split brain phenomena and unconscious pattern recognition, it unknowingly confirmed what I had intuited decades earlier. Studies at Princeton and MIT revealed that the human mind processes threatening information milliseconds before conscious awareness. The body reacts before the intellect can explain why. The same circuits that detect danger in the world are also triggered by internal contradictions, by the tension between who we are and who we pretend to be. In other words, your brain knows when you're lying to yourself, even if you don't. Every civilization has told this story under different names. In Greek myth, Narcissus fell in love with his reflection and drowned. In Christian scripture, Lucifer saw his own brilliance and mistook it for divinity. In the East, the Buddha faced Mara, the embodiment of illusion, beneath the Bodhi tree. The symbol repeats because the phenomenon is universal. The mirror is the threshold between the visible and the invisible self. To cross it is to risk dissolution. Imagine a man staring into a dark pond at night. The moon trembles on the surface, and for a moment he cannot tell whether it's the light above or something glowing within. He leans closer. The reflection ripples, and the face looking back at him begins to change. Slightly at first, then grotesquely. It knows his fears. It remembers every cruelty, every desire he swore to forget. His breathing quickens, but he cannot look away. Because for the first time, he sees the truth. The evil he projected onto others was his own exiled soul, begging for recognition. This is the forbidden initiation of self-awareness. It is not enlightenment, it is dismemberment. The ego is torn apart by the weight of its own deceit. The polite mask of morality cracks, and beneath it crawls the primal chaos of instinct. Most flee at this stage. They return to the comfort of denial, to the white noise of society, pretending the mirror was just a trick of light. But those who endure, those who stare into the black water until their reflection no longer frightens them, emerge transformed. They discover that darkness, when accepted, becomes a source of power. Yet the danger is immense. Stare too long and the shadow consumes you. Refuse to look, and it hunts you in other forms: anxiety, projection, addiction, self-destruction. Civilization itself is built upon this avoidance. We invent gods, laws, and distractions to keep the mirror covered. We fear not the unknown, but the known self that hides within it. When I wrote that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate, I meant precisely this. Fate is the shadow in motion, the externalization of what we cannot face internally. Every toxic relationship, every repeated mistake, every inexplicable misfortune is the psyche's attempt to show you your reflection through suffering. The question is whether you will recognize the pattern before it breaks you. So the mirror opens, quietly, almost imperceptibly. It could be in a dream, a betrayal, an illness, a sudden loss that shatters the identity you constructed. The crack widens, and for a moment you glimpse something looking back. It is not your enemy. It is not your friend. It is you, stripped of pretense, hungry for truth. And once you see it, you can never return to blindness. The only choice left is whether you will meet it as a victim or as a witness, because the mirror has only one purpose: to reveal. And what it reveals depends on how much truth you are willing to bear. There is a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the reflection ceases to imitate you and begins to observe you. That is when the danger begins. You think you are looking into a mirror, but the mirror is no longer yours. It belongs to something older, colder, infinitely patient. When you blink, it does not. When you breathe, it does not. And then, beneath a thin film of light, you see movement. The reflection tilts its head first, as if curious. Then it smiles. Not cruelly, not kindly, just knowingly. That is the instant you realize you are being seen by your own unconscious. Most people never reach this point. They retreat long before the threshold. But those who do, those who dare to keep looking, encounter what the ancients called the double, the daemon, the specter of the self. In every myth, it bears different names, yet its essence is constant, the mirror image that knows too much. In psychological terms, this is the stage when repressed material begins to return, not as memory, but as manifestation. You start to notice patterns, accidents, coincidences, people who reflect your worst qualities as if drawn magnetically into your orbit. Life begins to mimic your inner world. One of my patients once told me she felt as though her shadow followed her through her relationships. Every man I meet, she whispered, starts to act like the last one. Even when I choose differently, the ending is the same. I asked her to describe them. She said, they all look at me like they see something I can't. When I traced her dreams, they repeated one symbol, a black mirror cracking from the center outward. The unconscious was demanding confrontation. Each fracture represented a secret surfacing, her father's absence, her guilt, her longing for validation. The reflection had begun to speak its forbidden language. Modern neuroscience explains this through the principle of predictive coding. The brain doesn't simply perceive reality, it constructs it based on expectation. Your past defines the framework through which you interpret the present. When trauma, guilt, or denial distort that framework, you literally see the world through a broken mirror. You unconsciously select situations that confirm your internal beliefs, even destructive ones, because the mind prefers consistency to truth. The reflection you fear is not lying. It is showing you the reality you have created. Spiritual traditions have always warned of this mirror of illusion. In Buddhism, it is called Maya, the veil that makes the false appear real. In the Gnostic texts, it is the demiurge, a blind creator mistaking his own reflection for divinity. The Gospel of Thomas whispers, when you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. The shadow is not an enemy. It is the buried fragment of God within you, corrupted by neglect. When ignored, it becomes monstrous. When faced, it becomes whole. The forbidden reflection doesn't appear only in mirrors. It appears in silence. It stares back from the eyes of those you despise. It whispers in the stillness of insomnia. It mocks you in moments of hypocrisy. Its purpose is not to punish, but to awaken. Every encounter with it is a test. Can you look without judgment, without fear, without running? The shadow feeds on avoidance. The more you resist, the stronger it becomes. Psychologists today call this process shadow integration. Studies from Stanford and Yale confirm that confronting negative self-concepts directly, through exposure, journaling, or therapy, reduces anxiety and projection. But no laboratory can measure what it feels like when the mirror finally breaks. Because when it does, something ancient floods in. The ego collapses, and you realize you have been living in a house of glass. A fragile identity built upon reflection, not substance. You see how much of your personality was performance. You see the falseness in your smiles, the rehearsed morality, the borrowed opinions. You see yourself not as you wish to be, but as you are, fragmented, yearning, human. In that moment, there is terror, yes, but also liberation. The forbidden reflection is not evil. It is the forgotten contract between light and dark. You cannot choose one without invoking the other. To see your true self is to recognize that goodness is not the absence of evil, but the mastery of it. Every saint has wrestled with demons. Every healer carries the memory of the wound. Without the shadow, the light has no meaning. The patient I mentioned earlier eventually returned one last time. She sat across from me, calm, composed, unrecognizable from the trembling woman she had once been. I stopped fighting the mirror, she said. Now, when I look into it, it's just me. There was no triumph in her voice, only quiet acceptance. The reflection had lost its power because she had claimed it. The forbidden had become familiar. But the story does not end there. Because once you reclaim your shadow, you begin to notice something else. A strange mirroring in others, in society itself. The same mechanisms that shape the individual psyche also shape civilizations. When a culture represses its darkness, it too begins to project, to divide, to persecute. The forbidden reflection expands, and soon it is no longer confined to one mind. It becomes collective. And that is where the true horror begins. The shadow never rushes. It waits. It studies your routines, your patterns, your moral speeches and polite smiles. It watches you pretend to be whole. Then, when your guard lowers, when fatigue or heartbreak leaves the cracks unguarded, it begins to play its game, slowly, elegantly, with the precision of an ancient predator that knows its prey by heart. You will not hear its footsteps. It moves through emotions, not through time. You will first notice it as unease, a vague irritation toward the people closest to you. Someone's laughter feels too loud. A friend's success feels like betrayal. You justify these thoughts with reason, unaware that the shadow has already entered the conversation. It knows exactly which strings to pull, because it has watched you all your life. I once wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. That was not theory, it was observation. A patient of mine, a respected scholar, came to me after being caught falsifying research. He insisted it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But beneath his rationalizations, I felt a tremor. His dreams revealed a man chased by faceless judges, screaming, "It's not me!" When I asked what truth he was avoiding, he broke down. He confessed that for years he had envied a colleague's success. That envy, buried under layers of intellectual pride, had quietly rewritten his ethics. The shadow had worn his academic robe and signed his name. Modern psychology calls this cognitive dissonance, the brain's refusal to hold two contradictory truths at once. The ancient world called it possession. But the effect is the same. The more you resist admitting your darkness, the more control it gains over your life. Functional MRI scans show that denial activates the amygdala, the brain's fear center, while acknowledgement calms it. The mind literally fights itself to preserve illusion. The shadow thrives in this war, feeding on avoidance like oxygen. Every myth that endures contains this pattern. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Faust and Mephistopheles, the serpent in Eden. They are not stories of evil's arrival. They are stories of repression's revenge. When the light denies the dark finds another doorway. The serpent whispers not from outside, but from within the listener's own longing. This is the shadow's patient game. It makes you believe it is gone. You clean your habits, recite affirmations, surround yourself with light. But the moment something disrupts the balance, loss, rejection, humiliation, it returns, stronger and more articulate. It has studied your defenses and evolved around them. You cannot destroy it because it is made of you. A woman I treated once dreamed of a garden she could never leave. The flowers were beautiful, but their roots were black and pulsing. Each time she tried to pull one out, another sprouted. "It's my mind," she said. "No matter how much I cleanse it, the rot comes back." I told her the truth few therapists dare to say. Stop cleansing it. Sit among the rot. The garden was not a curse. It was her soul asking to be tended, not purified. The shadow cannot be exorcised, only integrated. In the modern world, this principle has become terrifyingly visible on a collective scale. Entire societies play the same game. They condemn cruelty while worshiping power. They preach peace while feeding industries of violence. The collective shadow manifests through nations just as it does through individuals. When a people repress their guilt, their fear, their envy, they unconsciously project it onto an enemy. Wars, genocides, witch hunts, these are the shadow's favorite theaters. Social psychology now has names for this: moral panic, group projection, outgroup bias, but the underlying dynamic remains ancient. The more virtuous a society proclaims itself to be, the darker its hidden impulses become. The shadow grows proportionally to the light it must conceal. When I see moral hysteria sweeping through a culture, I no longer see politics. I see the collective unconscious erupting through the cracks of civilization. Spiritually, the mystics described this long before psychology. The Gnostics called it the archons, forces of deception that feed on ignorance. The Christian Desert Fathers called it the temptation of false holiness. In Buddhism, it is the delusion of purity, the ego masquerading as enlightenment. The pattern is eternal. Denial breeds domination, self-righteousness becomes possession. But there are signs, subtle, unmistakable, that the shadow is playing its game within you. You feel it in your contempt for those who mirror your flaws. You hear it in the tone of your self-justifications. You sense it in your exhaustion after pretending to be good. These are not moral failures, they are signals. The psyche whispering, "Look here, you left something behind." The shadow's patience is infinite because time means nothing to it. It can wait decades, even generations, for acknowledgement. A trauma unhealed in a parent becomes a pattern in a child, then a curse in a grandchild. The unconscious never forgets, it only replays. To break the loop, someone must look directly into the mirror and refuse to look away. But beware, once you begin to see, the game changes. The shadow stops hiding. It reveals its strategy, how it molds relationships, careers, identities. It exposes the ways you've built your life to protect yourself from yourself. And in that revelation lies both terror and freedom. Because the only thing more painful than meeting your shadow is realizing how much of your life was shaped by running from it. And that realization, once it arrives, cannot be undone. It marks the beginning of the descent. The point where the mirror no longer reflects your face, but the abyss behind it. The next move belongs to you. There is no sound when the fall begins. Only silence, thick, heavy, deliberate. The descent into the abyss is not a plunge into chaos, but a slow sinking into recognition. Most imagine it as madness, but the truth is far more terrifying. It is clarity. When the illusions dissolve, when the stories that shielded you crumble, what remains is the raw architecture of your mind. And for the first time, you see the machinery that has been running your life. I remember a man who came to me trembling, convinced he was cursed. His nights were filled with visions, faceless figures, whispers in unknown tongues, sensations of drowning in his own body. "I think the devil lives in me," he said. But the devil he described was not supernatural. It was psychological. It was the accumulation of every emotion he had ever denied, every desire he had exiled. When I asked him to face it, he refused. "If I look," he said, "I'll never come back." He was right. The person who descends is never the same as the one who rises. The abyss is not punishment. It is initiation. It strips away false identities one by one. At first, the loss feels like death, the death of certainty, pride, control. You begin to understand why the mystics spoke of dark nights of the soul. The unconscious does not destroy for cruelty's sake. It destroys because rebirth requires space. The ego, swollen with self-importance, must collapse under its own weight. Neuroscience describes this as ego dissolution, the breakdown of the brain's default mode network under extreme conditions, such as trauma, meditation, or psychedelic experience. Functional imaging reveals something astonishing. As the boundaries of the self weaken, areas associated with empathy, creativity, and insight ignite. In other words, to know the infinite, the mind must first be broken. Jung knew this long before machines could measure it. He called it individuation, the alchemical transformation of the soul through suffering. You feel it physically. The air grows dense, the light in your room changes tone, familiar spaces become foreign. The body reacts as though facing mortal danger because, in a sense, it is. The death occurring is psychological, but the brain cannot distinguish between spiritual collapse and physical threat. The heart races, the skin sweats, the nervous system prepares for battle. But there is no enemy to fight, only yourself. In ancient myths, this descent was symbolized by heroes entering the underworld, Orpheus searching for Eurydice, Inanna stripped of her garments, Christ entering the tomb. Each story hides the same truth. To retrieve the soul, you must first surrender it. The underworld is not below, it is within. The monsters guarding its gates are not demons, but memories. Each one asks a question. Will you claim me or deny me again? During this stage, dreams become merciless. They stop speaking in riddles and begin to show you scenes too vivid to ignore. Betrayals you caused, desires you suppressed, faces of those you wounded. The unconscious, having waited patiently, demands audience. It is not satisfied with apology, it wants transformation. The descent becomes unbearable, not because of what you see, but because of what you feel. Shame, grief, rage, longing. The emotions you once numbed now roar like storms, and you realize they were never gone, only buried alive. Modern psychology calls this shadow confrontation. MRI scans show increased activity in the limbic system, the seat of emotion, when individuals recall suppressed memories. The body trembles because the past is no longer past. It is being relived, neuron by neuron, heartbeat by heartbeat. And yet, this physiological chaos carries the seed of redemption. Facing these memories integrates them. The fragments begin to align. Slowly, painfully, identity reshapes itself. In spiritual language, this is the baptism of fire. The Buddhists call it satori through suffering. The Christian mystics, the purgation of the soul. The Greeks knew it as katabasis, the descent before resurrection. Across all traditions, the message is identical. To ascend, you must descend. To awaken, you must first die. But the abyss has its rules. It does not tolerate arrogance. If you enter believing you will conquer it, it will devour you. The only way through is surrender, not to weakness, but to truth. You must kneel before what you've denied, confess the lies that built your identity, allow the illusions to dissolve. When there is nothing left to protect, the transformation begins. One night, after months of silence, the man who feared the devil returned. His face was pale but steady. "It wasn't the devil," he said. "It was me. The part of me that loved power, control, fear. I gave it everything I had because it made me feel alive." His voice trembled, but now it's quiet. I asked him how he silenced it. He smiled faintly. "I listened. That is the paradox of the abyss. The deeper you fall, the less you fight, and the clearer everything becomes. You realize that the darkness was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to be seen. The shadows you feared were your own cries for attention. The abyss was never empty. It was filled with everything you had abandoned. And when you finally touch the bottom, when you find yourself in the absolute silence of your own truth, something unexpected happens. A light appears. Not brilliant, not blinding, but steady. It doesn't come from above. It comes from within. Because the only light that survives the abyss is the one that darkness can no longer extinguish. That is the beginning of awakening, but few ever reach it, for most turn back when the fall becomes too real. Those who continue will learn that what waits at the bottom of the abyss is not madness. It is rebirth. Rebirth does not come with light. It begins in the residue of what has already burned. You emerge from the abyss not as a triumphant hero, but as something stripped, hollowed, and raw. The world looks the same, yet feels entirely different. Colors sharper, sounds heavier, silence louder. The old self has died, but its ghost lingers, whispering that you've lost something vital. You haven't. What you've lost is illusion. At first, the transformation feels like grief. You mourn the identities that no longer fit, the relationships that collapse when you stop performing, the comforts that crumble under awareness. Many mistake the stage for failure. They believe the descent broke them. But in truth, what breaks here is the mask. The psyche, like nature, must decay before it renews. Death is the mechanism of continuity. When I studied alchemy, I realized its true purpose was never to turn lead into gold, but to map this internal metamorphosis. The alchemists called it nigredo, the blackening, the putrefaction of the ego. What follows is albedo, the whitening, a phase of purification and reflection. Finally, rubedo, the reddening, the return of life through integration. This was not chemistry, it was psychology disguised as ritual. Every flame they lit symbolized consciousness consuming ignorance. Every crucible was the soul itself. Modern psychology would later rediscover this under different language: post-traumatic growth, neural rewiring, cognitive integration. Studies from Harvard and the University of Zurich show that after trauma, the brain's neural networks reorganize. Connections that once supported fear give rise to resilience and empathy. The psyche, when allowed to confront its darkness, reconfigures toward wisdom. Suffering becomes a form of evolution. But the passage is not smooth. The shadow does not vanish once faced. It transforms into an ally, but a demanding one. It insists on honesty. It rejects pretense. You begin to feel a strange duality, calm on the surface, volcanic beneath. You no longer react as before. Your anger becomes insight. Your sadness becomes awareness. Yet this newfound stillness isolates you. The more conscious you become, the fewer illusions you can share with others. You see through the theater of human interaction, the smiles that conceal fear, the righteousness that hides guilt, the love that masks dependency. It is both gift and curse. I once wrote that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The patient who reaches this stage does not smile. They radiate quiet authority. One woman, after years of nightmares, came to me and said simply, "It's not darkness anymore, it's depth." She no longer feared the things that once ruled her because she understood them. The demons had not disappeared. They had changed shape, now recognizable as wounded fragments of her own nature. Her shadow had become her teacher. Spiritually, this stage mirrors what the mystics described as union, not with a god outside, but with the totality within. In the Upanishads, the sage says, "Tattvam asi," you are that. The divine and the demonic, the sinner and the saint, are not opposites, but polarities of the same force. Jung called this the self, the total psychic organism that transcends good and evil. To reach it is to cease dividing existence into halves. You become whole by embracing contradiction. This is the essence of rebirth, the reconciliation of opposites. You no longer seek purity, for purity is sterile. You no longer seek perfection, for perfection is lifeless. You begin to live authentically, impulsively, compassionately, courageously, because there is no longer a hidden agenda within you. You have befriended the unknown. Yet, even here, danger lingers. Many who glimpse this truth mistake it for enlightenment and stop there. But the work of rebirth is continuous. The unconscious never sleeps. It demands ongoing dialogue. Ignore it, and the old patterns return, wearing new disguises. Integration is not a destination, it is maintenance. The light must be fed daily by the darkness that surrounds it. There's a moment after every great revelation when silence falls. The same silence that once signaled terror now feels like peace. You realize that awareness does not protect you from pain. It transforms how pain moves through you. Life remains unpredictable, cruel, miraculous. But it no longer feels like punishment. You have stopped negotiating with fate and begun to participate in it. The ancient Egyptians symbolized this state through the image of the scarab beetle pushing the sun across the sky. Every dawn was a resurrection, every dusk a descent. Life, death, and renewal were not linear but cyclical. The psyche obeys the same law. Consciousness is not achieved once. It must be earned again and again through confrontation, collapse, and resurrection. A man who has gone through this process no longer fears the abyss. He carries it within him as memory, as compass. He recognizes the shadow in others, not with judgment, but with recognition. Compassion grows naturally from the soil of self-knowledge, because once you have embraced your own darkness, you can no longer condemn someone else's. Rebirth through the shadow does not make you divine. It makes you human, fully, painfully, beautifully human. You realize that heaven and hell are not places, but states of consciousness. The same mind that can destroy you can also deliver you. The only difference is whether you dare to look, and in that final realization, something irreversible happens. The mirror that once terrified you no longer reflects your face at all. It reflects everything. The boundary between you and the world dissolves. The trees, the voices, the strangers in the street, all shimmer with the same hidden intelligence. The shadow no longer stands behind you. It walks beside you. You're no longer haunted by the darkness. You are made of it, and therefore, nothing can frighten you again. When an individual confronts the shadow, the transformation reverberates quietly within a single soul. But when an entire civilization refuses to, the echo becomes catastrophic. The same psychic mechanisms that govern one mind govern millions. The collective unconscious is not metaphor. It is the shared nervous system of humanity, pulsing beneath the illusions of nationality, religion, and progress. And when a society denies its reflection, the darkness does not disappear. It moves into the streets. History is the record of humanity's psychological projections. Every war, every ideology, every witch hunt has been the shadow's theater. What one person represses becomes neurosis. What a people repress become policy. Nations, like individuals, construct identities, shining masks called culture, progress, morality, while the exiled parts of their psyche ferment beneath. The louder a civilization declares its virtue, the deeper its buried shame. I saw this during my lifetime. The rise of ideologies that promised salvation through purity. The collective shadow disguised itself as righteousness, whispering that evil could be eradicated if only the others were destroyed. It was the same story as the individual who cuts off his own arm to remove the stain, only to bleed out in self-righteous triumph. Millions became possessed not by demons, but by archetypes. The warrior, the savior, the avenger. The unconscious had erupted into history, and humanity mistook its own madness for divine will. Modern neuroscience has begun to detect the echoes of this possession. Functional MRI scans show that when individuals participate in moral outrage within groups, their brain's empathy centers deactivate. The prefrontal cortex, seat of reasoning, dims, while the limbic system surges with primal reward signals. Collective hatred, it turns out, is neurologically euphoric. The group shadow feeds on dopamine. This is why mobs feel holy. Their ecstasy is chemical. In mythological language, this is the age of the mask. The Greeks called it persona, the face presented to the world. Beneath it always lies the collective shadow, chaos demanding form. Our age is intoxicated by visibility, by the digital mirror that reflects the ego endlessly back upon itself. Social media is not communication, it is ritualized projection. Every post, every outrage, every idol is a cry from the unconscious seeking containment. Humanity stands before 1 billion mirrors and still cannot see its face. Spiritual traditions have long warned of this crisis. The book of Revelation spoke of a beast that compels all to bear its mark, not on the flesh, but on the mind. Buddhism called it samsara, the wheel of delusion spinning faster with every desire. The Mayans saw it as the age when men would worship their own reflections in obsidian. Each myth foresaw a time when the collective mirror would shatter under the weight of its own self-obsession. That time is now. You can see the symptoms everywhere. Polarization masquerading as morality, compassion reduced to performance, fear disguised as certainty. These are not political phenomena. They are psychic. The collective unconscious is screaming for integration, yet no one listens. We blame leaders, systems, algorithms, but the darkness is ours. Every lie told on a screen is a shadow looking for acknowledgement. Every enemy invented by ideology is a projection of what we cannot accept in ourselves. In analytic terms, this is participation mystique, the merging of individual consciousness into group identity. It is regression disguised as belonging. The more we identify with tribes, the less we think for ourselves. The collective shadow loves this because it can act without resistance. It moves through slogans, flags, hashtags. It speaks through the mob's mouth. And each time it triumphs, the individual dies a little more. Yet within this global psychosis lies potential. The same interconnectedness that amplifies delusion can also awaken empathy. The neural networks that transmit fear are equally capable of transmitting awareness. Studies from Cambridge suggest that witnessing acts of compassion, even digitally, activates mirror neurons associated with altruism. The collective mirror can become a portal, not a prison, if consciousness reclaims it. The alchemists knew this, though they spoke in riddles. As above, so below, as within, so without. They understood that the purification of the world begins in the purification of the soul. The collective cannot be healed until individuals confront their private darkness. Each mind that integrates its shadow weakens the field of projection. The smallest act of awareness reverberates across the entire unconscious web of humanity. Consciousness is contagious, as is ignorance. Imagine, then, what would happen if entire communities dared to see themselves truthfully, if nations admitted their hypocrisy not as guilt, but as opportunity for integration, if religions embraced their contradictions as mirrors of the divine paradox. The world would not become perfect, it would become whole. And wholeness, not perfection, is salvation. But make no mistake, the shadow resists exposure. It will distort even truth into weaponry, twist compassion into manipulation, faith into fanaticism. The collective mirror cracks under pressure. In that moment, societies face their choice, acknowledgement or annihilation, the same decision every individual must make before their own reflection. When I said that the world will ask who you are, and if you do not know, it will tell you, I was speaking to civilizations as much as to people. Humanity stands now before its reflection, trembling. The image is vast, composed of war and art, cruelty and tenderness, invention and destruction. We are staring at ourselves and we do not recognize what we see. The question is whether we will turn away, as we always have, or dare to meet our own gaze. Because the collective mirror has begun to move, it tilts its head, studies us with the calm curiosity of the ancient mind that birthed it. It is waiting to see if we are ready, not to be saved, but to be seen, and if we fail, the shadow will find another way to reveal itself. It always does. Evil does not enter with a roar. It slips through the smallest crack in consciousness, a justification, a moral compromise, a single whispered thought. I am different. I am right. From that seed grows an empire of delusion. Possession, in Jung's language, is not the invasion of demons, but the abdication of awareness. When the ego identifies entirely with one archetype, the hero, the victim, the savior, it becomes blind to everything outside that mask. The result is always the same: destruction cloaked in virtue. Every century has seen it. The inquisitors who tortured in the name of purity, the revolutionaries who killed for freedom, the scientists who dehumanized for progress. Each believed themselves illuminated. None realized they had become instruments of the shadow. Evil, at its core, is not the presence of darkness, but the absence of reflection. It is what happens when the mirror shatters and man sees only his idea of himself. I once treated a man who was utterly convinced that he had been chosen by divine forces to cleanse the world of corruption. He was intelligent, charismatic, and profoundly sincere. But beneath his rhetoric, there pulsed a current of fury, a hatred for ambiguity, for imperfection. He had fallen into what I call inflation, possession by an archetype. In him, the unconscious had seized control, wearing the mask of righteousness. He spoke of salvation, but radiated annihilation. Neuroscience has recently begun to decode this phenomenon in its own sterile language. The limbic system, primal emotionals, can override the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason, when the brain's reward circuits are flooded by certainty. Extremist ideology, addiction, and manic conviction all share identical neural signatures, a collapse of the reflective function. The possessed brain is addicted to its own narrative. Like a drug, certainty releases dopamine. Doubt, by contrast, feels like withdrawal. Every mythology has warned of this intoxication. The Greeks called it hubris, the arrogance that offends the gods. The Christians named it pride, the first sin. The Buddhists described it as avidya, ignorance so total it believes itself wisdom. These are all metaphors for the same condition, the self. Forgetting it is not the whole. Possession is psychological gravity, the fall of awareness into identification. Evil organizes itself through architecture. It builds systems, institutions, ideologies, hierarchies that reward blindness and punish reflection. Once possession becomes collective, it needs no tyrant. It perpetuates itself through procedure. Bureaucracy becomes the shadow's cathedral. Paper replaces conscience. The person signing the order no longer feels responsible for the suffering it causes. I was only doing my job, they say. Thus, evil becomes efficient. When Hannah Arendt spoke of the banality of evil, she was describing possession at scale. The Nazi officer who oversaw train schedules to Auschwitz was not a sadist. He was a man who had surrendered the mirror. The unconscious, stripped of empathy, had restructured itself into machinery. The horror of such evil is not its monstrosity, but its normalcy. Possession makes cruelty seem reasonable. Spiritual traditions frame possession as loss of soul. The Gnostics warned of archons, parasitic intelligences that mimic divinity but feed on obedience. In truth, these are psychic processes, not cosmic beings. But the metaphor holds power. When you obey without awareness, you lend your soul to something that is not you. The possessed individual feels driven, justified, even exalted, yet hollow, restless, haunted. The unconscious feeds, but never satisfies. There are early signs, subtle, almost imperceptible. You begin to speak in absolutes, always, never, us, them. You stop listening. You feel a surge of moral pleasure when condemning others. You call it conviction, but it is hunger. The shadow's appetite for dominance disguised as certainty. These are the quiet tremors before possession takes full form. Modern research confirms that moral outrage, when performed frequently, reshapes the brain. Neural pathways associated with empathy atrophy, while those tied to aggression strengthen. In effect, the mind trains itself to feel alive through conflict. Possession is self-manufactured hypnosis, a trance sustained by repetition and applause. But there is a deeper layer, one even more insidious. Sometimes, possession masquerades as enlightenment. The spiritual ego, believing it has transcended the world, becomes detached from compassion. It speaks of love but denies responsibility. All is illusion, it says, as others suffer in reality. This is not awakening. It is spiritual narcissism, the shadow wearing white robes. To confront possession, one must restore the mirror. The first act of liberation is hesitation, the willingness to question even your own virtue. Reflection disrupts the trance. It reintroduces the unbearable complexity of being human. Evil cannot survive in ambiguity because it thrives on simplicity. It needs clear enemies, clean narratives, and blind faith. The moment you introduce self-doubt, the architecture trembles. There is a reason Christ's temptation in the desert begins with the words, "If you are the Son of God." The challenge was not external, it was psychological. Could he hold his identity without merging with power? That is the test every conscious being faces: to possess power without being possessed by it, to act decisively without confusing conviction for truth. The world today trembles on that edge. Technology amplifies our archetypes, making possession instantaneous and viral. A single image can ignite global hatred before thought intervenes. The collective mirror has shattered into millions of screens, each reflecting the shadow of the next. And through these glowing windows, the architecture of evil expands, pixel by pixel. Yet even here, hope remains. The psyche, individual or collective, contains an instinct toward balance. The same unconscious that creates darkness also craves integration. The antidote to possession is not repression, but awareness. A ruthless honesty that refuses both self-condemnation and self-justification. Evil disintegrates not when defeated, but when understood. Understanding, however, is not mercy. It demands that you stand in the tension between empathy and judgment, between action and reflection. It demands that you see the monster not as alien, but as human, and still refuse to let it rule. That is the architecture of consciousness. It can build cathedrals of cruelty or temples of wisdom. The blueprints are the same. The difference lies in who holds the pen. The turning point does not come with thunder. It arrives in silence. In the precise instant you realize that the voice you thought was you is merely one among many. Something within observes without comment. It does not judge. It does not justify. It simply sees. That is the birth of the inner witness, the one presence the shadow cannot deceive. At first, the experience feels alien, almost supernatural. You catch yourself mid-thought, mid-rage, mid-fear, and notice that awareness is watching the reaction unfold like a weather across the mind. Who is seeing this, you ask? And the question itself changes everything. The identification that once fused you with every impulse begins to loosen. What was once automatic becomes observable. What was once fate becomes choice. In analytic terms, this is the restoration of reflection. The psyche reclaims its mirror from possession. The inner witness is not an entity but a function, the capacity of consciousness to perceive itself. Neuroscientists call it metacognition, the self-monitoring network that allows the brain to evaluate its own processes. fMRI studies show that activating this network quiets the amygdala, dissolving emotional overreaction. In spiritual language, this is awakening. Awareness turns inward and finds itself unbroken. But awakening is not serenity. It is exposure. The light it brings reveals the ruins of the inner world, the wreckage left by years of repression and illusion. You begin to see the architecture of your suffering with forensic clarity, the patterns you inherited, the roles you performed, the compulsions that masqueraded as choice. Each revelation cuts deep, yet each cut bleeds truth. The witness does not intervene. It observes the surgery of consciousness in progress. I recall a patient who, after months of confrontation with his shadow, entered this phase. "It's strange," he told me. "I still feel pain, but it's as if I'm standing beside it. I can watch my despair without drowning." That detachment frightened him. He thought he was losing his humanity. In reality, he was gaining perspective. Compassion is born not from identification with suffering, but from awareness of it. Only the witness can love without possession. Philosophers have touched this insight across ages. The Stoics called it ataraxia, tranquil clarity amid chaos. The Upanishads spoke of the Atman, the silent observer beyond birth and death. In Christian mysticism, it was the eye of the heart. All pointed to the same realization. You are not your thoughts. You are the consciousness in which they arise. The world of forms, including the form called I, dances within that space. Yet the awakening of the witness is perilous. The ego, sensing its dethronement, fights back with new disguises. It may claim the awakening as achievement, declaring itself enlightened. It builds a subtler prison, a glass cell of superiority, mistaking observation for transcendence. This is the spiritual bypass, the final trick of the shadow. The witness must learn humility, or it becomes another mask. True seeing has no owner. Modern science echoes this ancient warning. Studies on mindfulness practitioners reveal that awareness without integration can trigger depersonalization, the eerie sense of watching life from outside the body. The psyche rebels when observation lacks compassion. The mirror must reflect not only truth, but warmth, or it becomes a blade. The awakened witness therefore balances detachment with empathy, clarity with tenderness. Once stabilized, this consciousness changes perception irreversibly. You begin to sense the shadow before it acts. Anger arises, but you see it like thunder forming on the horizon. Fear whispers, but its voice no longer commands obedience. Even pleasure becomes transparent. You enjoy it, but you know it will pass. Life retains its colors, yet you're no longer painted by them. The witness sits at the still point between movement and meaning. In daily life, this manifests quietly. You pause before speaking words that would wound. You listen more than you react. You feel the tension of old patterns but do not act them out. The world remains chaotic, but inside there is a pulse of calm awareness, the eye in the storm. This is not indifference, it is mastery. The self no longer serves emotion. Emotion serves understanding. Spiritually, this stage marks the return from the underworld. In myth, heroes do not remain in the depths. They bring back a gift. Orpheus returned with song, Inanna with wisdom, Christ with compassion. The gift of modern awakening is insight, the ability to witness one's own darkness and thus dissolve its power. The world outside changes because perception within has changed. Yet even this is not an ending. The witness, once awakened, faces a new responsibility to act without falling back into identification. Consciousness must move through the world like light through glass, illuminating, not grasping. The awakened mind becomes a mirror for others, reflecting not perfection but possibility. Every person you meet becomes another facet of the same awareness discovering itself. When enough individuals awaken this way, the collective mirror begins to heal. Reflection spreads. Hatred loses its contagion. The architecture of evil built on unconsciousness finds its foundations eroding. Awareness, quietly and without fanfare, begins to redesign civilization from the inside out. But it starts always with one moment, the decision to watch instead of react, to see instead of become. The shadow cannot touch that stillness. It can rage, seduce, threaten, but it cannot see. Only consciousness can see. And once seen, darkness loses its monopoly on truth. The inner witness is not salvation, it is sight. And sight, once restored, is irreversible. You may close your eyes again, but you will always know you are doing so. The illusion no longer owns you. You have become the one who watches, and therefore you have become free. There is a war being fought in silence, not between nations, not between faiths, but within the unseen corridors of the human mind. It has no flags, no front lines, no generals. Its weapons are ideas, distractions, and fear. And its battlefield is your attention. The moment you awaken the inner witness, you realize this war has been raging since the dawn of civilization. Awareness has always been the most coveted resource, and the shadow, both personal and collective, has always sought to control it. This war is subtle, invisible, patient. It doesn't need armies, it needs noise. The unconscious learns to feed on stimulation. It thrives in endless motion, the constant pulse of information, the cascade of screens, the synthetic storms of outrage and entertainment. The more distracted you are, the weaker the witness becomes. For awareness cannot bloom in chaos. It requires silence, stillness, space. The architecture of modern life is designed to eliminate these. The enemy of consciousness is not evil, it is noise. Every notification, every advertisement, every manufactured crisis serves one function: to fracture attention. Once divided, the psyche becomes suggestible. Without reflection, you absorb narratives as truth, opinions as identity, emotions as orders. The collective shadow no longer needs possession. It has algorithms. It can guide billions without command, merely by feeding them what they crave and fear in equal measure. Humanity has created the most sophisticated system of self-hypnosis ever conceived, and calls it progress. Neuroscientists confirm what mystics knew. Attention shapes reality. The brain's reticular activating system filters perception based on what the mind deems important. Focus on fear, and the world becomes dangerous. Focus on division, and the world fractures. The collective psyche has tuned itself to threat frequency. The news cycle, social media, and entertainment industry operate as extensions of the limbic system, keeping civilization in a state of controlled panic. It is not a conspiracy, it is biology monetized. Philosophically, this is not new. Plato warned of the cave, humans staring at shadows, mistaking them for truth. But the modern cave glows in the palm of your hand. Each screen projects not reality, but fragments of it, curated to evoke emotion without reflection. The shadow could not have designed a more perfect mirror. Endless self-obsession under the illusion of connection. Jung foresaw this when he wrote that the greatest danger to civilization is not the atomic bomb, but the psychic epidemic. That epidemic is here, and its symptom is distraction. The spiritual dimension of this war runs deeper still. The ancient texts spoke of Maya, the cosmic illusion that binds beings to ignorance. Today, Maya wears a digital face. The illusion is not just external, it is psychological. People no longer believe in gods, but they worship opinions. They no longer fear demons, but they fear irrelevance. The old idols demanded sacrifice, the new ones demand attention, and both consume the soul. But the battle is not hopeless. Consciousness contains its own defense, awareness of awareness. The moment you realize your attention is being manipulated, the spell breaks. This is not a metaphor. It is neurochemical. Mindfulness increases prefrontal activity, restoring self-regulation, and reducing susceptibility to emotional contagion. Reflection becomes resistance. Every act of conscious observation disrupts the shadow's supply line. The war for consciousness is not won through violence, but through vigilance. Yet this path is not easy. To reclaim your attention, you must endure withdrawal. The silence you once avoided becomes deafening. The absence of stimulation reveals the emptiness beneath, the hunger that distraction concealed. This is the second descent, not into chaos, but into void. Many flee from it. They reopen their screens, re-enter the noise, mistaking it for life. But those who stay, who breathe through the emptiness, discover something extraordinary. Beneath the hunger lies presence. Presence is not passivity. It is power purified of agenda. When awareness becomes stable, manipulation loses grip. Fear still arrives, but it passes through transparency instead of lodging in identity. The war continues, but you're no longer a soldier. You are the terrain. The battle plays out within you, and through stillness you become unconquerable. On the collective level, this awakening appears as rebellion. Not political, but perceptual. People begin to question the narratives that shaped their emotions. They disconnect not out of cynicism, but to listen again. This is consciousness reasserting itself through individuals. When enough awaken, systems based on distraction collapse naturally, for they require unconscious participation to survive. The old structures will call it chaos. In truth, it is healing. The mystics of every tradition foresaw this confrontation. The Bhagavad Gita described a war on a sacred field, Kurukshetra, between light and ignorance within the human heart. Revelation speaks of a final battle not between armies, but between truth and deception. These myths were never prophecies of apocalypse. They were metaphors for awakening. Humanity's salvation has always depended on the same choice, to see or to sleep. In the silent war, the most radical act is attention. To focus deliberately, to feel deeply, to think independently. These are revolutionary gestures. The system cannot monetize self-awareness. The moment you watch the stream of thought instead of being carried by it, you step outside the machinery. The shadow loses another soldier, but the war is not over. The collective unconscious will not surrender quietly. It will whisper through fear, through fatigue, through the temptation to forget. It will offer you safety in exchange for silence. Resist. Remember that consciousness is the only field where darkness cannot reign. The moment you choose to be aware, even for a second, you tilt the balance of the entire species. The silent war for consciousness is older than time and fought anew each morning when you open your eyes. The enemy waits in your thoughts, your habits, your screens. Yet its power depends entirely on your blindness. The cure, as always, is sight. And once you have seen, you cannot unsee. That is both the burden and the blessing of awakening. For awareness, once lit, becomes contagious. And light, true light, needs no victory. It only needs to remain. There comes a moment when the journey ends where it began, before the mirror. But now the glass no longer holds a single face. The reflection ripples, expands, dissolves into depth. You see not a person, but a vastness looking back. The entire machinery of consciousness, both light and dark, woven into one unbroken fabric. The shadow is no longer behind you. It is within the totality, indistinguishable from the light it once opposed. This is not transcendence in the romantic sense. It is revelation. Everything you feared was part of what you are. In this stillness, you begin to understand what Jung meant when he wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Enlightenment is not an escape. It is inclusion. The mirror of infinity shows all, the saint and the criminal, the victim and the perpetrator, the thought and the thinker, as expressions of one field of awareness endlessly reflecting itself. You realize the horror and the beauty were never separate. The abyss and the heavens are two sides of the same infinite mirror. The human mind resists this truth because it annihilates identity. The ego, once proud architect of meaning, trembles before the vastness it cannot control. Here, words fail. Time disintegrates. What you once called me dissolves into something immeasurable. Not an entity, but an event, consciousness aware of itself. The silence that follows is not emptiness, but fullness. It vibrates with a strange intimacy, as if the universe were exhaling through your lungs. Science, in its own vocabulary, has begun to graze this mystery. Quantum physicists describe entanglement, particles separated by distance behaving as one. Neuroscientists studying near-death experiences report moments when the brain's linear perception of time collapses, replaced by overwhelming unity. None of this proves the soul, yet all of it points toward a reality where separation is illusion. The psyche is not confined to the skull. It is a lens through which the cosmos perceives itself. The mirror of infinity is both instrument and image. Ancient traditions knew this long before instruments could measure it. The mystics of every faith spoke of union, the drop returning to the ocean, the spark rejoining the flame. But what they rarely said, or could not, is that this union is terrifying. To lose the boundaries of self is to lose everything that ever felt safe. The shadow, the ego, the roles you played, all dissolve in the same light. What remains is not bliss, but truth. the awareness that there was never a you to begin with, only consciousness pretending to be human for a while. In this state, morality itself transforms. Good and evil cease to be absolutes. They become movements within the same current. Compassion emerges not from superiority, but from recognition. You no longer love others because you should. You love them because they are you. Their pain is your pain. Their ignorance is your forgotten reflection. The mirror of infinity erases the distance between observer and observed. It reveals that every act of cruelty was ignorance acting out its hunger for reunion. But beware, this realization is not a crown. Many who touch it fall into delusion, proclaiming themselves gods. That is the final temptation, the last shadow, spiritual inflation. To see the unity of all things does not make you divine. It makes you responsible. Awareness without humility becomes poison. The universe does not awaken in you. It awakens as you. The proper response is not worship, but service. To live as consciousness is to embody awareness in every gesture, every silence, every act of creation or compassion. The modern world stands trembling before this mirror. Technology has connected minds, but not hearts. Knowledge expands, wisdom contracts. Humanity stares into the infinite reflection of its own making, data, images, thoughts, and still refuses to see itself. Yet the potential remains. Each individual awakening adds a spark to the collective field. The mirror does not need everyone to awaken. It needs enough light for reflection to sustain itself. Awareness spreads not by argument, but by presence. The mystic said that when the soul reaches completion, it ceases to seek. There is nothing left to fix, nothing to escape, nothing to become. The game of opposites ends. The mirror stands still, endless, unbroken. To live from this place is not withdrawal, but participation, a constant dance between form and formlessness. You work, love, lose, create, and grieve, but the witness within remains untouched. You move through life as if through a dream, yet with deeper sincerity than ever before, because you know the dream is sacred. In the end, the mirror reveals its final secret. It was never reflecting you. It was teaching you to see. Every fear, every failure, every dissent was a lesson in perception. The darkness was not punishment, but training, a way to sharpen your sight until you could bear the brilliance of truth. The shadow was the threshold, the teacher, the gatekeeper. You bow to it now, not in worship, but in gratitude. And then comes the final silence. No words, no analysis, no philosophy. Just the quiet recognition that everything you sought was always here, watching through your eyes. The light and the dark collapse into a single presence beyond definition. You have not conquered the shadow, you have become transparent to it. The mirror of infinity stands before you, perfectly still. Look into it, and you will see galaxies spinning, atoms trembling, faces of strangers, memories of lifetimes, all shimmering within the same boundless awareness. That is what you are. Not the reflection, not the glass, but the endless gaze itself. And somewhere, deep within that eternal reflection, the shadow smiles. Not in menace, in recognition. Because finally, you have seen